Today, when Sanibel Captiva Beach Resort's president, Tony Loppe, walks across the road from his historic signature property, Tween Waters Inn, he sees hundreds of feet of dunes and sandy beaches. But he can remember an October day in 1987 when the view was much different. An unnamed Gulf of Mexico storm had moved through the night before and had eroded the beach away to the point where portions of the road itself were washed out.
Yeah, it was dark when I came to work, and I pulled in, and a couple of staff said, "Tony, you better go outside right away and take a look out front." And I said, "What's up?" They said, "Take a look." So I came out here early in the morning, and you could see that the road was totally gone up to the midway point, and from there it was about a 9-foot drop straight down. It was a curling sea of some sort, and literally sucked out the beach in overnight. Now, we didn't have a lot of beach in those days to begin with, not we have now after beach renourishment, but what was there, it was, there was about 5 or 10 feet of beach, and it was literally sucked out and gone in the road and asphalt, and if there were any trees or anything else, all gone in one night, just gone.
It was not just that a resort had lost its main amenity. The community itself had lost a main road providing access on and off the island.
We kind of opened ourselves up, and we allowed people to come into our south entrance, drive all the way through our property, and go out the north entrance in order to have access to the rest of Captiva. Otherwise, you could not pass. If we didn't have that allowing people to go through, wasn't going to happen. So it brought immediate attention the need for beach protection to protect this road and the importance of it. Lloyd Wright, who was the founder of our company, and Lloyd lived on Captiva and knew that there were some problems. He had been trying for literally years to try to get people together to put a taxing district where they would tax themselves to help pay for the beach renourishment, and to do this on a regular basis every 7 to 8 years, whatever it would take to save the beach and keep this in a great spot that we are. So after the road went out, there was this immediate awakening. People saw the need, and so they started the process of figuring out how to tax people in a fair way. Obviously, there's protection, there's benefits for tourism, so they had experts come in and financially figure it out and to come up with a system.
This 1987 event provided a major turning point in the way Captivans approached the erosion issue at that time. In this documentary, we'll explore the pivotal geologic activities which led to this erosion. We'll also examine the creation of the Captiva Erosion Prevention District and outline the beach renourishment projects and other actions that organization has taken to solve the problem. Plus, we'll introduce you to island property owners, business operators, civic volunteers, coastal engineers, and other residents who have been witness to the evolution of these solutions. It's all coming up next in Sands of Time, the history of erosion on Captiva, part of the Captiva Memories collection of the Captiva Island Historical Society. Most local boaters know Redfish Pass for its great fishing opportunities and sometimes problematic navigational challenges. But what you may not know is that the creation of this pass led to many of the erosion problems suffered by Captiva Island today. You see, prior to the 1920s, there was no pass here. Captiva and what's now known as Upper or North Captiva were actually one island. Some historic records indicate the pass was created when a major hurricane hit the southwest coast of Florida in 1921. But scientists believe another huge storm that moved through the area in 1926 may have contributed to the pass's development as well. One fact that is undisputed is that once the pass was created, the previously stable north to south distribution of sand along the Gulf beaches had been disrupted.
Erosion has two components that we usually look at. One is your recession of the shoreline. The other one is the volumetric loss of sand.
Stephen Keene is a coastal engineer with the Aptum Engineering Company of Boca Raton, formerly Coastal Planning and Engineering, a company which has provided many years of engineering services to the Captiva Erosion Prevention District.
The erosion on Captiva Island began in earnest in 1920s when Redfish Pass opened. So Redfish Pass is like the source of the erosion wave that's working its way down Captiva Island through northern Sanibel. And in order to explain that, let me just look at this picture here. And you can see right now this is Redfish Pass, this is Captiva Island. But right here you can see this is called the Ebb Shoal, and this is the Flood Shoal, and there's a lot of sand there. So when Redfish Pass opened in the 1920s, it immediately started building these two areas. In building those areas, you're taking sand out of the longshore transport system. And so that means sand coming from the north was being interrupted before it got to Captiva Island. As such, if you look at this point here that I was pointing on there, before Redfish Pass opened, the amount of sand going into that point and out of that point was roughly equal. And there was a reasonable amount of stability on Captiva Island. After the inlet opened, then the amount of sand coming from the north to that point diminished a lot, but the amount of sand leaving that point was still at full strength. This led to a deficit of sand, leading to, at this location here, over 1,000 feet of shoreline recession in the initial years after the inlet opened. This shoreline recession migrated down coast all the way to Blind Pass and onward to northern Sanibel over the next 50 years.
This 1944 aerial photograph of Captiva Island will give you some idea of the amount of shoreline recession that has occurred since that time. If you compare it to the 2020 Google Earth aerial map, you can see a significant portion of the shoreline has disappeared, even with the renourishment projects that have taken place since the 1980s. This Captiva land plat from the Lee County Records Office provides a similar story. In 1911, someone had platted a subdivision called Gulf View for the north end of Captiva, in the area where Allison Hagerup Beach Park and the entrance to South Seas Island Resort are located today. This is the actual land plat document from 1911. As you can see, the lots were platted in an area that is almost totally in the Gulf of Mexico today. On this 1963 revision of that land plat, you can see that many of the planned lots on the beach are in an area marked eroded. Another interesting note from the original 1911 land plat is that there was a road that ran right along the beach that the developers called Captiva Boulevard. A hand-drawn 1960s map from the reference section of the Captiva Library also shows this eroded shoreline and a beachfront road all along the northern end of the island. This road would be several hundred feet out into the Gulf of Mexico today. The practical effect of this constant beach erosion through the 30s, 40s, and 50s was that people were losing their homes. Roads were routinely being washed out and repaired, and property owners often had to take private actions like rock revetments to protect their property. In the 1950s, the Captiva Civic Association began holding regular meetings to discuss the erosion issue, but there were many different opinions as to how to approach the problem. Ironically, at one of the early meetings called to discuss the issue, the chairman of the Civic Association couldn't make it because he had fallen in a hole caused by road erosion and had to be taken to the hospital. Finally, in 1958, islanders voted to create the Captiva Erosion Prevention District, and in 1959, this special taxing district was approved by the Florida legislature. The minutes of the very first meeting on May 14, 1958, show that 3 Captivans who had long been involved in civic affairs were selected as commissioners. They were Ted Levering, a World War II veteran who had fought in the D-Day invasion and who later went on to write a book about 1940s island life called The Other Side of the Bridge. Holger Jeremiason, a former Florida Keys and Miami fishing guide who had once led charters for President Herbert Hoover. And Harold Bixby, a retired aviation pioneer who helped develop Pan American Airways and was one of the principal backers of Charles Lindbergh's famous Spirit of St. Louis flight from New York to Paris. Other minutes from the first year of CEPD meetings show a quick succession of positive actions taken to try and get the erosion problem under control. First, get the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers to join the district in a beach erosion study of Captiva. And in the meetings that followed, they hired a new attorney, requested a taxing agreement with the Lee County Board of Commissioners, hired companies to take aerial photographs of the beach, took action to repair or remove previously installed erosion prevention structures damaged by storms, discussed the creation of a bond issue for future financing, and set up a new bank account. The year 1958 also saw the CEPD take on its first major project, the installation of what was called dog bone groins along the beach. A few private Gulf front homeowners had installed similar devices prior to the island-wide effort because they had been used in other parts of Florida. While the structures at first appeared successful in retaining sand, they later proved to not be a long-term solution. Sanibel Island native Ralph Woodring went to work at South Seas Plantation, now South Seas Island Resort, in 1961, and part of his job was to repair some of the dog bone groins on the north end of Captiva that had been damaged by storms.
We were repairing groins when I went up there first deal. They were what they call dog bones, were big concrete groins they put out on the beach to try to protect the beach up there. Wound up being a bust. They built the groins were shaped like dog bones, if you will, and hurricane had beat them up a little bit, so we went out and repaired them, got them all back in good shape, and along come another hurricane, of course, and tore them all to hell, and so that was the end of that. And so now there's no trace of the groins on Captiva Beach at all. And during that time, we did a number of other things to try to protect the beach up there, from wooden groins and some sandbags that they filled up with sand. We filled up with sand and put them on the beach, and none of it helped a whole lot. And so eventually wound up with the program that they use today is filling the beach with an offshore dredge.
Most of the earlier efforts were small efforts, so people didn't want to admit they needed a big, expensive project initially, so they looked at various types of groins. They looked at various types of structures like breakwaters, and they also looked at small nourishment projects. And over the years, between the 60s and the early 80s, these methods were not really giving them a lot of satisfaction. And I think almost every beach nourishment program around goes through these stages.
By the early 1960s, it was becoming clear to Captiva and other barrier islands around Florida that beach renourishment, that is, actually replacing beach sand that is lost to erosion, was the only true long-term solution. One of the earliest efforts by the Captiva Erosion Prevention District in that direction occurred in the 1962-63 timeframe, when they pumped 107,000 cubic yards of sand through a pipeline from the bay side of the island near what was then Timmy's Nook, now the Green Flash, over to the beach side.
The pipe, which is a big old rusty pipe, about a foot or so, ran just on the northern boundary of our property on Captiva, south of Timmy's Nook. And they were pumping this sludge, honest to goodness sludge, out of the bay and putting it on the beach. And I don't remember that it had any positive effect at all. It may have for a year or so, but the material was so ill-suited to the site that it soon washed away. The story is that there were two gentlemen on the barge doing the dredging, and one of them went over to Timmy's for lunch, and an hour passed, and then another hour passed, and the guy on the barge was saying, where the heck is he? And so he got into their other boat and went over to Timmy's, and Timmy's was that kind of place that you could kind of fall into. Time stood still over there somewhat. Quite an interesting place. And the story is that they kept the dredge running, and the dredge hooked rock the immovable object in the bed of Roosevelt Channel and pulled the whole barge and sunk the whole barge. So the upshot was they had to, I guess those guys lost their jobs, but they had to bring a whole nother barge for thousands and thousands of dollars, innumerable, a mass of money at that time, all the way from Tampa to be able to recover the dredging barge and continue with their nefarious work.
After the failure of this early attempt, the science of how to do beach renourishment using offshore dredging and pumping sand back onto the beach was improving and being implemented on coastlines across Florida and around the nation. The CEPD continued to pursue beach renourishment as a solution to the continuing problem of erosion, which was still threatening Gulfront homes and roads. This graphic from one of the early engineering studies shows the impact of shoreline erosion between 1967 and 1980. The numbers you see here represent how many feet of shoreline had eroded during those years at various points along the beach. During this period, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers recommended Captiva for a federally funded beach renourishment project, and Congress authorized it. But there were strings attached regarding improved public access to the beach and more parking, and Captivans rejected the project. Smaller projects were still being implemented by private landowners and the CEPD, but getting island-wide agreement on the best way to accomplish large-scale renourishment and pay for it was difficult. In 1981, South Seas Resort decided to do its own beach renourishment project independent of the rest of the island, and it was funded by the resort's property owners. This was part of a major redevelopment of the resort under the ownership of Mariner Group, led by Bob Taylor and Al Tenbrook.
I couldn't get the CEPD to really move forward with an island-wide program, so we decided to do a privately funded beach restoration program for just the 2 miles of South Seas Beach. And we went to our property owners and we created a municipal taxing district, and we came up with a cost allocation formula, and we gained their approval. Because of the cost allocation formula and going through property taxes, we were able to borrow the money to pay for it. And we did it. We put this 2 miles of new beach in. Well, first of all, it saved our property and enhanced the value of it. And by the way, those rocks are still out there, underground. But it showed the rest of the island what we were talking about. And the critics all of a sudden started to say, whoa, maybe this isn't as bad as I thought, kind of thing.
So meanwhile, back at the ranch, working with the Erosion District, we were continuing to try to put together a project. And they had hired Tetra Tech, and they had begun the engineering process and eventually put together a financing plan and the allocation of the cost to residents of the island, as well as looking into state and federal funding. While this was going on, and the Erosion District was working on this, there was polarization on the island. A substantial number of the islanders were in great support of this project, wanted to see it happen, saw the value of protecting the island, making the beaches available and accessible, kind of stopping all this seawalling and revetting. That was one group. And another group was very concerned about environmental issues and the kind of changes that would come to the island as a result.
For 6 years after the South Seas Project, the Anti-Beach Renourishment Group would prevent the CEPD from gaining island-wide approval of a plan to move forward. But several incidents in the 80s would help push sentiment toward a long-term solution. The road washout at Tween Waters in '87 that we outlined earlier was one such incident. Plus, Gulfront homes and businesses were constantly being threatened whenever tropical storms or hurricanes passed through the area. Andreas Bieri is the owner-operator of the Mucky Duck, a long-standing British pub well known for its Gulfront location. Several times in the 1980s, storms came through and eroded the land away right up to the edge of the building. So Bieri and his partner actually opened another Mucky Duck restaurant on Fort Myers Beach in the event the Captiva location had to close.
We were extremely close to losing the ground underneath the restaurant. So yeah, it was a nervous time. And I remember we even had to go for the emergency permits to put rocks all along the front at the restaurant. And also, of course, that's when I kind of decided to buy a backup. If something happens, if you lose the restaurant in Captiva, we would still have something somewhere else. And that's why the Mucky Duck on Fort Myers Beach came into existence.
Jensen's Marina co-owner Jim Jensen was a young man working at the original Mucky Duck in the 80s as a bartender, and he remembers those same storms.
I've been working while storms were coming in, and waves were breaking on where the picnic tables were and that, but we were still open, everyone was inside. But it got to points where we've seen picnic tables get washed around the building, behind the building, almost to the building of the restaurant itself. One storm, I remember Louanne Martin was a waitress there. She had a little Suzuki Sidekick, and she was parked right on Andy Rossi Lane. And in the morning, her Jeep was covered up to the door in sand.
These relentless erosion impacts were taking their toll on the Captiva shoreline all throughout the 80s, and every few years a new nourishment plan would be put to a vote, but the idea kept getting defeated by narrow margins. In fact, there was even dissension on the CEPD board itself. However, a group of concerned citizens got together and kept educating the community about the need for a renourishment plan. Harry Kaiser was one of those people. The retired New York publisher first bought this Gulfront property in the early 80s. When the first referendum for beach-wide renourishment failed, he and many of his neighbors had to install rock revetments like this one behind their homes to fend off the encroaching waters.
When the first referendum failed, that's pretty much when we knew we had to put in rocks or some revetment to stop the waters, because they were coming underneath my gazebo and underneath the house to my the left. Water ran right under the house. So we knew, and people began to realize this is getting serious. So that's when we had to put in the rocks to stop it. Now, as you can see, there's another 300 to 400 feet of beach out there.
Kaiser was one of the early proponents of beach renourishment and went on to become a CEPD commissioner.
I think since the 80s, when we started the nourishment, that what we have now is, at least I was told, we have one of, if not the most, best projects of beach nourishment in the world.
There were a lot of people on Captiva who put blood, sweat, and tears, really literally, into doing this, because with the dissension that was going on, it was challenging for them to even live in their community.
Finally, in late 1987, not long after the road collapsed in front of Tweenwaters, a beach renourishment referendum passed by an overwhelming margin. This allowed the CEPD to hire engineers, lawyers, and other consultants necessary to design and build the first island-wide beach renourishment project starting in 1988. This would be the first of 4 major projects completed so far, with the next one scheduled for 2021. Hans Wilson is a coastal engineer who served as a commissioner for the CEPD in the 80s and helped develop the first beach management plan for the island.
Beach restoration is essentially a community decision not to retreat from the shoreline. Because if all of the infrastructure and the buildings and everything that was along the coast was retreating and being moved backwards, landwards, you would never have to do a beach restoration project. So what you do instead, you say, okay, we have consciously made a decision to hold the line, and now we're going to fill the beach to a profile and a template and a soil content that matches what's there. And basically you establish this profile that mimics the normal natural beach profile, and you essentially take what was the beach profile that exists and you just simply slide it out with that fill material in between that is there as the buffer for storm protection and recreational benefits as well.
I think the erosion district has really, as I would say, normalized this process so that people can feel comfortable that the beach is taken care of, is taken into consideration, and is not something they need to worry about. It just happens.
The district itself has proven itself over the years that it could be effective in protecting what's now $1.5 billion worth of property, but to do a lot, locally to take care of issues and not rely on other governments or nature just taking its course. We're trying to create a situation where it protects the property, protects the people, and protects an island that we love. And I think more than anything, the fact that Captiva is self-reliant is something that impresses me a great deal.
At the time of this interview in 2020, Mike Mullins was chairman of the Captiva Erosion Prevention District and working with staff on planning the next beach renourishment project scheduled for the winter of 2020-2021. But his interest in Captiva erosion goes well beyond the walls of the CEPD offices on Andy Rossi Lane. Planting native vegetation to trap sand in place and create dunes has been part of every CEPD project since 1988. And Mullins has been experimenting on his own Gulfront property with native plant species to see what role they play in growing the dunes to a point where they provide a level of erosion control.
Just about the time I first came on to the district board, I put a PVC pipe in my dunes and I marked it every 6 inches, and it's a vertical pipe. So I wanted to be able to see how it grows, but I chose an area where there was vegetation maybe 10 feet seaward of it and 10 feet landward of it. And I wanted to watch how it grows. And in that period of time, it's taken all that time to get close to the pipe, where now there's vegetation coming near the pipe. But seaward of it, there are 5-foot and 6-foot dunes have grown from the vegetation that was put there. So to me, it kind of proves a point that the dune vegetation works, and I had a control pipe in place to be able to measure it and see how it's going. So I always enjoy that kind of thing. And I would encourage people to embrace dunes and realize that dunes are the surge protector that protect property and protect roads and protect animals and so on.
Like Mullins, many other island residents have been witness to the positive effects beach renourishment has had on Captiva in the past 4 decades.
About every 7 or 8 years, we need to renew the renourishment. It isn't just something you do once and that's the end of it. Every 7 or 8 years, they bring in the dredge, they bring in the big pumps and the pipelines and the pipe handling equipment, dozers, and they hook up and run 24/7, and that's what's kept it going all these years.
Seattle businessman and rancher Jim Piggott and his wife Gay bought this winter home in 1981 after visiting Florida on a business trip. Like so many others at that time, Piggott had to armor the back of his property with rocks. Not only was he a strong proponent of beach renourishment, he and his family and friends found a way to actually enjoy part of the dredging process.
Originally, when the big pumps, and we're talking about 1,500 horsepower pumps, were spitting out the sand and from offshore, and there were numerous shells. It was great to see the shelling, and we all could stand right around the end of the pipe, and they'd keep extending the pipe as they continued to dredge, but they'd wait and they'd hunt for special shells, and that was part of the fun of it. But the second time, all of a sudden, they were worried about injury, and they started to fence off the area, so we'd go in at night and look around. Well, then they started doing 24 hours, and you couldn't go in, and so that led to another sort of sneaking in. And but now, because of concern for somebody getting hurt, injured, it's pretty hard to go in and get any shells as they come out of the pipe.
Today, you don't have to go very far to see what 20th century islanders were experiencing until beach renourishment began in the 80s. On January 14, 2020, emergency sandbags were brought into the northern end of Sanibel, just south of Blind Pass, to repair beach damage done by an unnamed storm. This area had been suffering from erosion ever since Hurricane Michael in 2018. This is video of that same area captured by the Captiva Island Historical Society just 2 years earlier. And this is what it looked like when we videotaped it for this documentary on March 1st, 2020. There used to be 4 cottages on this stretch of Santiva Beach. They were built in 1972, but a series of tropical storms from 1988 to 1991 eroded them away one by one. Dow Burnstead and her family owned the cottages at the time and told us about that night in 1991 when the last cottage washed away.
We had just one tropical storm after the other. And in Thanksgiving weekend, we had, I would say, like 4 or 5 tropical storms that year. Never a hurricane, but just a tropical storm, just enough that it kept the Gulf stirred up. It had eroded the beach. So the tides were strong. The water kept coming up. And so we had that rough water and those strong tides, and it just kept eroding until it eroded the beach away. And it was funny because the one night, we gave our people, would you like to evacuate? And the people in the front cottage, I said, you need to leave because you're right there. People in the back cottages, I said, I've never had water in this unit, so, do what you want to do. I'll give you your money back. You can stay, you can go. So they opted to leave. Well, the next morning, that whole building was on the ground with no foundation. So I'm standing there outside the building, and I just coincidentally see these people riding by in their car looking and I'm thinking, oh, thank you, Lord, that they evacuated, But so yeah, the sand just couldn't take it. It just couldn't take the constant bad weather.
In 1992, the city of Sanibel filed a complaint with the state's Department of Natural Resources indicating their belief that some of the erosion on Santiva was caused by Captiva's erosion control efforts at Blind Pass, specifically this groin which was installed at the south end of Captiva. But since that time, the city of Sanibel and the Captiva Erosion Prevention District have worked together on erosion control efforts.
It was clear to me over the years that we needed to work with Sanibel and look for help from Sanibel and at the same time be willing to help them. And they don't typically nourish their beaches. However, they've had serious erosion on the northern part. And so we're trying to work with them on that, and they'll be included in our next project. They're working on some studies right now to find out what's needed there. And we're going to delay our project to be able to encompass that. I would say there was contention in the past. It's been my belief from when I first got involved here to get to know city council, get to know the mayor, get to know the city manager, to work closely with them, get to know their people in the Department of Natural Resources. And over time, that's evolved to a very positive relationship. Well, the mission is basically to try to reduce erosion and restore the beach after there's been erosion. I think the name Erosion Prevention District is certainly a bit of a misnomer because we don't prevent a lot of erosion. What we do is restore a lot of the beach after there is erosion. However, it's sort of serendipity that they picked that name because as we look into the future and we see concerns about sea level rise and climate change, the problems of erosion will not just be on the beach, but they'll be on the bayside and in the passes. But we need to develop new processes that will further protect the passes and the bayside.
You still have to tip your hat to the residents of Captiva back then to recognize a problem back in the 50s and to have the wherewithal to go to Tallahassee and establish their own special district. And Captiva Erosion Prevention District is a very special district. There's only a few districts like that around the state.
Many Captivans through the years, since probably before 1959, worked very hard to protect the island. And so the people who are watching this, you are benefiting from many, many years of many people, both volunteers and paid, working together to make the island the pretty wonderful place it is.
As I said before, this has got to be one of the best, in my opinion, as well as the engineer's opinion, in the world for beach nourishment. It has escalated tourism. It has escalated the value of all the homes along here. And it also gives us a place to more or less enjoy the peace and quiet.
If we didn't have an erosion prevention district and never spent a nickel on anything on the beach, it'd probably be about half the island here, and you wouldn't be going to a beach. It would be just a seawall. It'd be like, you know, the Keys where there isn't a beach. And you go out to that beach for a sunset or a day on the beach, and it's incredible. And you think of it, if you went out there and it was just a seawall and nowhere to sit or lay out, there's just no comparison. I mean, just walk out to that beach and that's all you got to know.